All right. Well, I want to get this kind of kicked off with a question. I'm going to ask Mindi this first, but I'm going to kind of let others kind of jump in on this a little bit. What are some initial sort of theological perspectives that we need to have when we start thinking about technology? You think about it from the way we think about theological education, but I'm going to ask each of you just a little opening foray. What are some of the theological threads that may need to be in play as we have such a conversation?
Sure. I think, to start off with, to have just a basic definition. What is technology? What do we mean by tech? Oh, okay. All right. Speaking of technology. So, helpful to have a basic definition. What we mean when we say technology. And I think we're going to talk about the dark side of technology too later. It doesn't work. So, but for me, my basic definition of technology is anything that makes human life easier. And that can be as simple as pencil and paper to as complex as some of the latest tools and software programs and use of things on the internet. But it covers a huge gamut. And so thinking in very simple kinds of terms about any tool that makes life easier. And we go all the way back into Genesis. Genesis chapter 4 is one of the first sections most people skip when they're reading through Genesis. It's the first genealogy. And yet even reading through that list of this person begat that person, they include these little notes of this person was the ancestor of all of those who work with metal. This person is the ancestor of all those who play the harp. This person, and so even in that very first list of the ancestors of humanity, it includes notes about technology, about the use of tools, about the development of things that make human life easier. And so that's a lot of where being a Bible major, that's a lot of where I start in thinking about theological foundations, that from the very beginning of creation, God invited the man and the woman to be stewards with him, to be co-creators with God in the world that God had created and the many resources that God had provided for human beings to adapt and to use in order to improve human life. And that's evident in the garden, it's evident today.
Trevor, give us just an opening foray about thinking about theology and technology, just a quick word there.
I think the big question with faith and technology is where is trust and where is faith? I think as Mindi was saying, there's been a development across time where we increasingly rely on tools. And I think the question now is, have we reached a point where technology has sort of become our first responder? How's that threshold? Have we or are we crossing that threshold? And what are the implications for that? And has the object of faith actually moved? I think that's kind of the big question.
Yeah. We'll come back to that one. What Trevor just laid out there is a big thread that I want us to chase this afternoon. Robert?
Yeah, I was gonna say that we tend to paint technology always as something bad, and it is the forces of evil with our students. And I usually use a knife. I'll hold up a knife and say, is this knife good or bad? And depending on how close I am to the student, they'll sometimes go, ooh, it's really a bad thing to me on the front row. But what it comes back to is it is fairly value neutral, and they say it depends on how it's used and whose hand that technology is in. So that's an issue. Now, coming back to Trevor, I love that answer of what I put trust in. We asked at a youth and family conference here at ACU about 18 years ago, a bunch of teenagers, the survey was done inside Bible classes all over the nation. And we asked this question: what gives you hope for the future? And their number one answer in Bible class was, at that point, 18 years ago, technology. And I thought the Bible answer would be, of course, Jesus would be your answer. But at that point in time, 18 years ago, when things were not nearly as developed as now, they said technology is what's going to give us hope. It's going to help us in the future. So it rings back to what Trevor's talking about.
That question. Robert, keep the mic there, and let me. Knowing that there is this spectrum and this reality about technology, but in youth ministry and the work in the world that you're doing, how has that technology, say over these past 18 years, changed formation, spiritual formation, in the conversation between generations? We've got kids who have all kinds of stuff, and we've got parents who are just now figuring out what Facebook is, and they've moved on and all that. How does that change the conversation for spiritual life?
The fundamental changes, this is what I notice in churches at least, and I don't think it goes with society in general. We've been working off a model in the past of the older generation always teaching the younger. You learned a trade by going and apprenticing with someone. You learned farming through watching your dad, and he would pass down the wisdom and the experience of that generation. What's happened with technology is it's reversed the information flow. And so we have these people called digital natives, which are our kids coming up, who are very conversant. They come out of the womb and they have an iPhone in their hand. And they know how to use it. It's intuitive. I have a 2-year-old grandson who knows how to swipe that screen and make all those pictures work at 2 years old. And I'm thinking about what I was doing at 2, and it wasn't that. I can guarantee you. But technology has come along, and it's basically given the younger generation an advantage at information, which is power. They are now showing us how to use the technology because they're better at it than we are. I think that's especially true with the baby boomer generation. We were still trying to catch up to a lot of what's going on. The next generation of parents, it seems like, is starting to pick up enough skill that they're on still somewhat of more equal footing. But I'll tell you, I believe the younger generation is always going to have the lead. They're going to have more power. Consequently, what we're asking the older generation to do is you're supposed to still teach these young people and still have these spiritual conversations and wisdom passed down from the older generation to the younger generation. And they're going, I don't think they need us, number one. Number two, younger generation says, I can get to anything I need to with just a few clicks on this phone. So it's changing that in some ways, which is a little scary. Because they both need each other. We know that should happen. The other thing that's happening is, does the number 140 ring a bell with anyone? What's 140, brother?
It's a limit characters you can put in a tweet.
Now, 140 characters for a tweet, which is how a lot of them are talking to each other. And they're trying to summarize everything in 140 characters, which shortens the conversation that we have. To say God is and reduce it to 140 characters is a little tough. To say, how do I forgive someone in 140 characters? Difficult for us. So we have an older generation that's used to having a little more dialogue and a little more back and forth. Younger generation is saying, I can wrap it up pretty quickly. I want to wrap it up quickly. I don't have time to stay in this conversation very long to talk about the deeper nuances of wisdom, scripture, spiritual formation in general. Anyway, that's a good start.
Okay.
I would love to follow up.
Yeah, Mindi, why don't you? I was headed your way.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks also for the Kleenex. Speaking of making your life better. So I think some of what you are seeing in youth ministry and in congregational kinds of relationships, we're certainly seeing. I think faculty here in the room could attest to this even better than I could sometimes in educational technology. That our faculty are not digital natives for the most part, and they're seeing the challenges of working in that kind of environment to reach the students. The students in turn know more about the learning management system than they do. We were just talking at lunch about a student had found a feature in Canvas that they didn't even know existed, and so seeing that relationship shift. And so faculty are asking good questions, not just on this campus, but in lots of conversations about what is the role of a faculty member? Why do we need universities if you can Google everything?
Yep.
What is that role? And I think we can let that scare us, or we can really use that to have good conversation about the ways that education is about so much more than information, and instead can be about transformation, and the ways that faculty are still very much needed to help students transform into more and more into the image of Christ.
All right, Trevor, I'm headed your way.
Okay.
So I think we're beginning to hear in this that we're clearly in a cultural shift. There's a shift, a significant shift that's occurring over the last, and I'm going to use Robert's 18 years. It's longer than that, but we can just think about that 20-year span. And we sense in that a power shift, to use the language here, and we're playing catch up. We see that in our educational technology. So all that's going on, but underneath that is this haunting statement you made a moment ago, Trevor. Where's trust at between technology and faith? So what about this artificial intelligence? What's happening here, and how does that speak to faith? Unpack that little enigmatic statement you made a moment earlier.
Artificial intelligence is increasing exponentially, and so tomorrow is farther from today than today was from yesterday. If that makes kind of a sense.
You may need to say that again.
that tomorrow is farther from today than today was from yesterday.
In terms of development.
In terms of development and the speed of the development. Those who work in the field of artificial technology and in the field of transhumanism, they sometimes cite this date of 2045, the so-called singularity, which is the most ambitious of the singularity dates. More conservative are 2075. But basically what they're doing is they're extrapolating the speed and cost and power of technology. If it continues to increase today at the same trajectory, exponentially increasing, you reach a point where basically, and they borrow this from theoretical physics, this idea that you reach a point and you can't see beyond it. You reach a point in which prediction doesn't make any sense because that point is beyond. And I think that's really the question. I mean, the Turing test is all the discussion now, that this test whereby a human being engages with artificial intelligence and is unable to tell whether or not it's a machine. And every year, even every month now, it seems that someone, some school, some group of scholars, some experimenters are claiming, well, the Turing test has been met. And then others, kind of wrestle with, well, did it or did it not? Mm-hmm. But no one really questions the fact that we're quickly moving to that point of perhaps even full sentience, and a sense where you have robots or programs that are self-aware, that are fully capable of critical thinking, and a lot of this exists in fragments. And there's a couple of issues there. Is that one, every time we try to think about what that means, are we basically projecting our own limited imagination on what that intelligence looks like? And so Nick Bostrom has recently written a book out of Oxford called Superintelligence, in which he makes the case that every time humans try to imagine intelligence beyond ours, we fail, simply because it's just a projection of us, and that we have really no idea what's out there. There was actually another conversation that got started in February that's sort of lit up on the web and social media, where a pastor in Florida went on Fox News and was interviewed, and he made the claim that artificial intelligence will run religion, and not just religion, but Christian religion. And the basic logic was that if this is the supreme form of intelligence, Christianity represents the best form of religion, and that therefore they will seek Christianity. Well, that raised a whole host of other questions, like why would artificial intelligence need redemption? What would sin look like for artificial intelligence? And there's just this host of questions. But and I'm not really sure that, at least in none of the communities of faith, the Christian communities that I've been a part of, have there ever been a discussion about what it means to be in community with artificial intelligence. I mean, we are in community in a sense. I mean, Google tells us where to go, and Siri can find, a restaurant, but what does that actually mean? And we're just beginning to explore with students what it means when humans form significant bonds with artificial intelligence, whether it's a computer program or a being. This year and next year are supposedly the year of the rise of the family or social robot, whereby you can have JIBO, for example, JIBO, by a group of researchers and scholars out of MIT, where you're actually going to have this artificial intelligence in your home that becomes a part of the family.
Well, so in light of that, what are one or two things that raises for questions about faith?
Well, I mean,
and then I'll ask others if they'd like to.
Sure. I mean, the question is, are they going to be beings of faith? Or, and this is the big question, or does faith become something that inferior beings have as they look at us? I mean, I think that's a real question. I think also what the future of religion looks like in general, which we'll get to that a little bit later, that itself becomes a question.
Right.
I mean, I think probably even bigger than that, though, is do we survive? And how does that relate to Christian doctrines about the end time and God's control of time and plan for time? And some have reintroduced the notion of the Tower of Babel as kind of being reenacted in another way in space. And should we just openly adopt, or should we adopt as people of faith a Luddite position, which is this idea that we just stop, or even go so far as to intentionally oppose through legislation, and some have even suggested violence, which doesn't seem prudent to me,
Right.
and as a way of stopping.
Or is this sort of a natural sort of evolution of
Right.
humankind that we're seeing now, not physiologically, but in some material way?
Right.
Yeah.
Do me that.
Is that, Robert or Mindi, any kind of reflection on all of that?
Yeah.
Sure.
If I understood it all, I would comment about this. I am pretty sure that my vacuum cleaner at home that works sometimes and doesn't work at other times is demon possessed. I'm sure there'll be something to say about that. I'm hoping to retire before this becomes a big issue.
That's fun. That is really fun. Not to respond to all of that, but I'm just really struck by that question of, does faith then become something for inferior beings? And what came to mind immediately was Paul's statement about the wisdom of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God and the wisdom of God. And so just thinking about what, even for the early church, what kinds of claims they were making and the ways that it was received or not received in the larger society, that this might be another example of the ways that Christians are called to as Randy would talk about, subvert the culture. And so for us to be thinking about ways to actively engage those conversations, to not stick our heads in the sand and pretend it's going to go away, to not say, well, we'll leave this, we'll abdicate those decisions to other people who understand the issues better, but to really become aware of what's at stake and make sure that our faith commitments are engaging in those conversations, and that we're setting good examples for fellow believers about ways to thoughtfully engage those questions.
Good.
Not that I have the answers.
Yeah. Let's send the mic down to Robert. I'm going to pull us back from this abyss that Trevor parked us up against.
Thanks a lot.
And for a moment, we'll come back and play with it again. I have to take it in small pieces. So, Robert, let's be more modest, a little more close to home, and ask in what way can technology, notwithstanding your vacuum cleaner, how can technology help us build Christian community and spiritual formation? Are there ways in which the knife in the hand becomes a useful tool? And what help us walk through some of that?
But the really great thing, technology, there's just amazing things. Every once in a while, I'm sitting here driving in the car to say Temple or Austin, Texas, and my wife's going toward Dallas in her car, and I'm talking to her at the same time, and it cracks me up. Students go, "How did you do it when you didn't have all this stuff?" And I said, "I had to stop and go to a thing called a pay phone and call my wife, or find someone with a landline," and they're just flabbergasted. How'd you get anything done? Well, that's a great question, but bottom line is, it does amazing things. It actually helps me connect up not only with people in my geographic area, but I love the fact I can find out about Christian community much more nationwide and even worldwide. To share life with them, I get to see what they're struggling with. I know I got a text one night from a guy whose son was in terrible trouble, and I could tell he was not doing well as a dad, and we had a conversation as he drove in the truck on the way home from the hospital, and he was driving a 3-hour drive from Dallas back to Abilene. We got to have community using technology that we would not have a chance to have. So I am so thankful for it in so many ways, that it does allow us to actually share in lives. Now, some of you have, I don't know how many Facebook friends you have. I think I'm kicking around 2,000 something. Those are not all my close friends, by the way. They're contacts for the most part. There are some that are friends on my book. But the bottom line is, I find out things about their world, and it helps connect me to them. So really some outstanding things. The problem comes in that just because we have the technology, it's not always used for the good. And it's not always used for really deep community-centered things. I don't know if you know, in 2012, this is called a phone, but in 2012, this ceased being used primarily for a phone. It's a text machine. And it crossed over where it's used more for text than to actually talk on. I asked my students the other day, what happens when someone calls you on this thing instead of texting you? And their reaction, younger version, is, what's wrong?
When someone calls.
When someone calls.
Someone calls, yeah.
So
Something
that's
wrong.
the assumption. Something is up if they call me on this phone. I'm thinking, what if I'm just busy? Well, I still think you're mad at me because you don't respond quickly. If I send you a text and I don't respond quickly. So everything is really speeding up, which, of course, with community, sometimes it's a little bit of a problem. So it's that double-edged sword back and forth. James 1 talks about be quick to listen, slow to speak. I would add quick to listen, we're good at. Slow to text is the other problem with it, because we have moved our communication to the quick text. And sometimes you've seen the hostility that occurs on this. I have parents and even sometimes leaders in our church that want to argue something on this thing, which is horrible. Horrible way to build and deal with community, especially hard stuff. It's a problem.
I'm hearing you there. It has ways of enhancing community.
Absolutely.
But there are also places where it thins out the possibilities for community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing that I'm finding with parents, especially in churches, is no one is writing a lot of rules on how to use our technology. There's no rule book that goes, hey, don't do that. Don't have this hard conversation. And they get sucked in because they get a hot text from one of their teenagers that says, you're not going to talk to me that way. And all of a sudden they go, I'll show you. And they jump in because they're quick. It's a quick reaction. And they get pulled into it because there's not a rule book out there that helps us know this is a good community building way to use it and here's a bad. To have the ability to talk to them during their day and say, hey, I'm praying for you in this conversation you're about to have, great thing. To say I'm praying for them as their parents go into a surgery, as they're struggling with a decision that day. It's a spiritual decision. To have that capability to remind them one more time of what God has called them to, and that I'm with them in thought and prayer. Awesome deal. So once again, it's that double-edged sword.
Yeah. Mindy, can I follow up with you?
Sure.
In what way can we make use of technology?
Sure, absolutely.
We got to negotiate this, but
Yeah.
can we do that without being fearful and that?
Absolutely, and I think again, thinking about it as a tool. How can this tool be used? How can this improve? And always paying attention to that potential dark side, the ways that tools can be misused or abused, misunderstood. Even the parable of the talents comes to mind, that we have responsibility, we'll be called to account for the ways that we used the gifts that God provided for us, including the gift of technology, the gift of resources. Thinking about all of the students that we have who are engaged in located congregational ministry while they're taking online classes, and how the kinds of community that can be built in that, the kind of just-in-time learning that can come out of that, the ways that our students are equipped for the ministries that they're doing, but the ways that we also get feedback from them that says, well, that sounded really good in theory in the textbook, but when I just took it to my elders last night, that fell flat. And so we as well as a faculty get feedback about how God is at work in the churches, and what are the needs that we can help to equip them for. What are the ways that the church is changing that we can work into that. But I think a lot of it is the willingness to ask those hard questions about what are the resources available to us, and what's the cost? And I don't just mean, do we have the budget to pay for it? But what are the ways, what are the things that we need to take into account as we're using this resource? A really well-designed website is not going to save your church. But if a really well-designed website can point to the vibrant, Christ-centered community that you have in your church, then it's a good tool.
Good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I've got a question for you.
I was just going to say, I think one of the, as they were saying, one of the best things about technology is the option for voluntary presence. You can voluntarily choose, and you have to learn how to control this, to be present in any number of situations. But the other side of that is involuntary presence. And there is a generational thing here, which I have no idea what the data is. But, and this is an issue we face at ACU, and I know other communities of faith have it, that anyone can hit a set of buttons and record whatever is going on. And so in those moments when you need to have a hard conversation, whether it's in a church context or in a school or in a classroom, and immediately you are involuntarily present to whomever that person chooses to send the file. And that's something, I don't consider myself that old, but it's really scary that you don't have no control over your own presence. Mm-hmm. Or when you're filmed, and whether you're at church or whether you're in the classroom, and then you get back and all of a sudden what happened in that room is now on social media, and you signed no contract, no waiver. Mm-hmm. And it may be flattering, it may be unflattering, but it's a reality.
Can we stop this camera right now?
Yeah.
I didn't say anything. Did you say anything?
No, I didn't. But I think that pivot between thinking through voluntary presence and involuntary presence is helpful.
Well, that picking on that up more is the sense that I have an embodied self,
right.
And then I have this virtual self.
Correct.
And that stretches. Does that relate to this, what you're saying here?
No, it does actually. In one of my classes in core, we do a project called Second Self, where we actually we randomly assign students in the class to another student, and they are granted access via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to the other student, and they write a 250-word description of that other person, based simply on
what's on Facebook.
On the second self. Do they love kitties or, whatever, whatever it is. And then the students get that back and they respond to that second self. And sometimes that is, I accurately project what I consider to be my real self onto my second self. And other times it's horror. That I had no idea that I was projecting that. But what we've actually found now is that there's more than a second. There's a third and a fourth. Because there's a Facebook self, which is the self for parents and grandparents. And there's an Instagram self, which may be for parents and like family and Twitter, but then there's also a Snapchat self, which may be for like your very closest friends. And so there's layers of selves, and this research is just really beginning, but people are actually talking about the adolescence of second selves. as like a 40, 50-year-old person, you go through the adolescence of relearning to be a child in social media, which is a complicated, I mean,
Is that why we have all those kitty pictures on Facebook?
I guess, but but the multiplicity of selves and the compartmentalizing of selves is interesting because you wake up and you have to check on all your selves. Who liked me or wrote something about me in my sleep? Who's following me now? Who wants to be my friends? And it can almost create a kind of schizophrenia of who am I?
Right.
Am I the Instagram self? Am I the Facebook self?
Good. Yeah. Now, Robert or Mindy, you want to play with that along with that?
Only other thing I'd add is adolescents especially, and even as college, you understand college students are late adolescents. So they are still developing that identity. And part of that identity is, back in my day, you would say something and you'd get no reaction from your classmates. So you would go, I'm not going to do that tomorrow. Well, they have access to use this technology to actually shape and form what am I getting the most hits on? What am I getting the most likes on? And that slowly morphs them into this identity. And so they try out all sorts. We Elkind talked about a patchwork self, that you take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. Same thing's going on, and they're actually using technology to pull that off and go, that's who I am. But it's based off the reactions they're getting back, both positive and negative, in this. The only other thing that I would say is one of the downsides, the scariest things to me, there is these apps being devised like Yik Yak and others that have no accountability of what you say, and you can take someone on and rip them apart, but do it anonymously, which seems like a bad, evil setup to begin with. But it's at a college level now. It's moving down to the high school and junior highs now. They're starting to discover these type things, but it's set up in a system to give some pretty rough feedback to your kids and my kids.
Oh, I would just add that I think we have multiple selves, even outside of the digital world, right? We have our student self and our church self and the self that we present to our grandparents and the self we present. And so a lot of those conversations are about how to be true to yourself, how to know yourself in all of those different settings, and that your digital persona feeds into that.
Good. Well, I'm watching the clock a little. I want to get a little more out from Trevor. We've been talking about technology and the way in which this two-edged sword and how it plays itself out. Trevor, you kind of threw out some stuff earlier that took us up to that abyss. So I want to go back now. We've taken a breath. Let's go back over to the abyss. And I'll ask it this way. We talked about technology being a tool, and the knife. You use that language. I think that helps us understand technology. But what happens when the tool becomes more than a tool? Does the tool begin to have a soul? And what is a soul? What does it mean to be a being? Walk us into that, and then bring us enough back from the abyss that we can still stand. And don't leave us hanging out over the
edge. In some ways, at a liberal arts university, one of the best and most difficult questions is, what is a human being?
Yeah.
And we explore that in the various disciplines across campus, whether it's literature, the social sciences, or even the hard sciences. And what constitutes a human being is a difficult thing. Maybe we got to do a survey about that, just to kind of get a sense of what people actually think. I sometimes ask students when Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, and he mentions a spirit, a pneuma, what we usually translate as a soul, a psyche, and a body. What is he talking about? And that usually is, there are a lot of curious looks back at me, because if they know what a spirit is, they conflate that with a soul. And then that usually raises more questions. What a human being is I think, the question maybe about technology and what separates us from technology. And is it something like an immaterial soul? One of the issues that we have in the world of biblical studies is that the Hebrew word, I don't want to go too far down this line, but nephesh is sometimes translated as soul, right? So you read the Psalms and you read about the soul. Well, the problem is that these are ancient Near Eastern texts written before Plato, right? For whom we have a lot of our ideas of the soul. And so what you're actually watching in the Bible is these various authors across different periods as things are revealed, coming to grips with what it means to be a human being. And so when they translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek, they take the nephesh and it becomes a
Platonic
psuche.
sort of.
Exactly. And then we have our own notion, and now there's robust debate going on among Christian theologians and Christian exegetes if we should stop translating psuche as soul and start translating it as mind, which is interesting. Not the organ, right? Not the brain. But that sort of last frontier of what makes something quintessentially human, that separates creativity from non-creativity.
It's not just pure cognitive thought, though.
Right. It's trying to get at that space of where thought begins.
Okay.
And is that the real you? And we're in a strange place because we have churches where we talk about souls a lot. We talk about saving souls, etc. But if you go to Hendrick Health, right? I've not looked at the intake form in the last month or so, but I don't think they ask you on the intake form in the ER, how's your soul? Right? Because it's a difficult concept to quantify medically. And so with these changes in technology and increased access to the human body, I mean, we have unprecedented access to the human body right now. We've not discovered all of its mysteries, but we have unprecedented access to the human body. Are we, as we have this technological verge, also on the verge of a new anthropology? And that is, I think, a real open question to which I don't have the answer, but it will directly reflect faith, communities of faith, Christian confession, is how that gets sorted out.
As we sort that out in relationship to conversations about technology,
Right.
then that's the live place that you're.
Correct. That needs robust conversation, thoughtful, critical,
Yeah.
across all disciplines.
Yeah. Good. Maybe that's a place to put at least a period. It may not be the end of the paragraph, but at least the end of the sentence. And turn to you, and we've got about 5-7 minutes here or so before we'll let you guys go. Where would you like the conversation to go? You have a question that we could explore here. Kent.
Yes, I love this. This is really rich. We've talked a good bit about the pluses of technology, while acknowledging that there are downsides to this tool. But one of the things that I'm curious about, is the sheer capacity of technology to absorb that core human resource of attention. So, television appeared in my early youth, and it was a small part of our day, but it happened. But now, the latest research I've seen is 72 hours a week, average American adult spends in front of a virtual screen. 72 hours a week. So if we get 30 hours in the workplace, then we've got another 6 hours a day in front of a virtual screen. And so, affirming all the good that's been said already, the strengths of this gift, I'm wondering how we come to grips with, one, the neutral but time-consuming, attention-devouring aspects of this. Maybe it's not bad at some level to spend 4 hours a day on Facebook, but what else could have been happening during that time that might have been better? That's one question. And then, the clearly corrosive aspect of this technology, the capacity it has to grab our attention and hold it in places that erode our souls.
Okay.
And so I guess, my question here is, how do we come to grips and help people maybe deal with all of the issues here? Robert or Trevor once said, we don't really have, we're receiving this culture of high intensity, dense technology usage,
Right.
without much opportunity to reflect deeply on how what's good about that, what's bad about that, and how can we be different than what we receive.
Let's pick up on that a little. Robert?
Let me just respond real quickly. This culture has been called a culture of distraction. When you're having a conversation, Jan and I are talking, all of a sudden my phone rings and I go, just a second. And I look and I'll check, and if the person trumps her, then I'm talking or I'm texting back. And she may keep talking to me the whole time, and I'm out. That's a community problem, and that's a rural problem. And the thing that we have to deal with is, do we set that same model with our students, with our kids? The thing that cracks me up, I will be in my office, and Randy and I have talked about this a little bit. My phone will ring, the landline will ring when I have a student in the office, and I'm locked in, I'm still listening. And they're going, do you not want to answer that phone? No, I'm here with you. That tells them something. And I actually talk in classes about that because I have a feeling no one's telling them. That's rude. One, it's rude. Two, I want to be fully present. And so the one person is bugging in the room when my phone rings is the student, because they're so they're in that Pavlovian dog that as soon as it rings, I got to do it. The deal they did a few years ago, I think Beck did this, the phantom rings of these deals on your pocket. You think it rang, so you reach in and it's not ringing. And we have students who are having that happen every day. About, I think it's 38% of all students have that happen once a day. And it's like, gotta have it. I'm addicted to it. So the rules have to be modeled. It's putting everybody's phones at night as families is something we coach them to do. Is they all go in one place to recharge, and it's not in the kids' room, because otherwise they're getting text all night long and they don't get any sleep. That goes for dads to go, put your phone down during supper. We don't answer during supper. It's some real basic stuff, but we're going to have to be the ones modeling, teaching, to help them understand it. And then the sheer volume, is unbelievable. Average teenage girl text per month is up in the range of 4,200 a month.
Amazing.
That's a lot of time. And well, of course, they're really deep conversations like, what's up? And that's how you get to 4,200 every month.
I actually think we're just beginning to perceive the real nature of this problem, which is a human problem, in that I can right now physically separate myself from this device. That day's coming to an end soon.
It's on your wrist now.
And so now Apple has the new watch, and the next step, and this gets to sort of the transhumanist thing, is the full integration of technology into the human being. And so I understand the desire to create this kind of physical space, but I think that's just a short-term solution for a longer-term issue of how we negotiate the bombardment of information. We can maybe hold on to this for a little while and have the baskets where we put our phones, but when it's in your wrist, or it gets more difficult to shut it off.
I am planning to retire before that happens. Just want you all
Let's
to
take
know.
another question here. Yeah, Steve.
Just to follow up on that one, just in terms of the classroom, where ACU has gone big time into iPads and laptops, and really is encouraging that, and it's really cool. A lot of neat things there. And yet, if you're not like just the most interesting person that ever lived for more than 5 minutes, then they're off somewhere else. If you're letting them have the test there, you can be a great teacher with a lot of great things, but if they're gone, they're gone. And so it's like, okay, how do you balance that, keeping the tech in the conversation, which is good, yet competing. So with that goes to good like you were saying.
You want to take a shot at that?
Sure.
Mindy?
My snarky response is, students have always had distractions, right? They can doodle on their notebook, they can look out the window, they can, kick the chair in front of them. There have always been distractions, and so the challenge for a good teacher is the kind of engagement that is producing helpful information for the student, that's requiring some interaction from them rather than just the passive listening, that turns them towards each other to say, how do you share this with one another? So some of that's about course design, curriculum design, and yet at the same time also sometimes just giving up and saying, I don't have control over what the student chooses to do or not do with the information I'm presenting them. I've been called to share this information with you, and it's something that I'm passionate about and something that I'm investing my life in. You don't have to choose that. I don't have to give you an A. So I think faculty still have the upper hand in some of those conversations, but I would lean more towards the first, the wanting to be engaging, wanting to ask those kinds of real life questions. What does this information mean for me and for my life and for the work that I see God calling me to in the future, that can hold attention and cause them to think that they can't just Google the answer to?
I'm going to ask my panelists, we're just taking just 90 seconds here, so 30 seconds at top. Is there one quick observation you make, or a book that you would recommend someone to read, or some little takeaway that you would offer as we close up here? I know I'm putting you on the spot and ask for that. Is there any things?
140 characters.
Yeah, this is the 140 characters. What's the tweet? Anything here?
I just say real quickly, technology, once again, we've used the term tool a lot, and it's going to keep rotating into life more and more. Bottom line is, technology can tell us about a storm that's coming, tell us when, but it can't change the direction of the storm. There's some things, there's some lessons, there's some wisdom that we're going to have to flat just face as a Christian community that technology will not solve completely. It may help us, but it's not going to solve everything. It doesn't change the course of history in all ways. Okay. So just realize it has limitations as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
I would just say that whatever we expect is not what's going to happen. And I mean, just an illustration of someone just making that point is that book I mentioned by Nick Bostrom, Superintelligence. And so in some sense, what we're signed up for is a pretty wild ride. It's going to have bumps and turns and twists that no one has ever seen or predicted, and even the most informed among us are going to get it completely wrong. And that's scary and exhilarating.
There will be surprises.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love the Google. So rather than saying, hey, this guy wrote a book and I don't remember its title, you can actually look it up. So John Jewell was one of my colleagues when I was teaching in Dubuque, and he has written a book called Wired for Ministry. It's a little dated now, as all books in that area. At the minute it's published in paper, but I think he has some really good, just foundational questions for churches, for congregational leaders to be asking along those same lines of a really good website is not going to save our dying church. And so to think through those foundational questions about why are we here? What is our calling? How can technology help that? How can it also, and he also has some challenges for people in leadership positions in churches about disengaging, about technology fasts, about not answering emails on Sunday. Just those sorts of challenges, thinking about technology as a form of discipleship, just like all the rest of the disciplines that we're called to. So if your church is perhaps looking for a conversation starter, Wired for Ministry is a good way to start that conversation.
Thank you. Would you show your appreciation for our panel?